listening to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network, the nonprofit organization that strives to address the staggering disparity in resource availability for individuals suffering from mental health disorders, processing disorders, addictions, trauma healing, and sexual identity challenges. Together, we strive to end the stigma associated with these challenges so that true healing can begin. Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network. I'm your host, Ange, and welcome you to episode number 19. An amazing conversation with Chev from Florida Rising. Now, I'll allow him to share his full name as he pronounces it so much better than I do. Chev, with pronouns he, him, and they, them, proudly serves as the Chief Operating Officer for Florida Rising. Born and raised on the historic west side of Winter Park, Florida, he has spent more than 15 years in senior leadership positions in local and national roles within the nonprofit sector, which includes positions with the YMCA, City Year, and Legacy Organized Florida. A first-generation college graduate, he has done academic studies at several notable institutions. Chev is very active in the community and serves on several notable local, state, and national boards and committees, which currently includes the Contigo Fund, Hope Com Unity Center, Executive Nominating Board for the City of Orlando, on the Board of Trustees of the Winter Park Public Library, as an executive board member for Habitat for Humanity of Greater Orlando and Osceola County, Poverty Solutions, and Opera America's Racial Justice National Community and National Trustees Committee. In recognition of his service to the community, he was named 2020's Most Influential by Winter Park Magazine, and he was also named as a finalist in 2 categories in Orlando's weekly magazine Best of 2021 Awards, and named as a finalist in Best of 2022 in 3 different categories, including Best Local Influencer, Best Local Big Shot who's not an elected official, and Best Local Leader during a pandemic. In 2023, he was named the Diversity Game Changer by the Orlando Magic and Florida Blue. Chev believes his existence is to be a voice and to fight alongside and with marginalized communities, particularly those who come from low-income, BIPOC communities, the LGBTQIA+ space, youth in education, youth leaders, and for those that are committed to the peace movement. He's been sought after as a speaker for his deep work in activism, diversity and inclusion, and organizational and leadership development. In his free time, aside from spending time with family and his twin baby sons, as an active musician, you can hear Chev in several of the classical art spaces across the U.S. East Coast, and as the contemporary worship director for First United Church of Winter Park. Now, this episode contains several sensitive topics, including gun violence, murder, gender identity and sexual orientation discrimination, and poverty. If you feel triggered, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups. We also discuss topics that some may find controversial, such as gun control, abortion laws, voting rights, etc. And hence, we want to remind you that the opinions expressed are the host and guest's own opinions and do not represent the opinions of any organization. So, what are we waiting for? Fill up your coffee, sit back, and let's get started. Listeners, this is Ange, your podcast host, and in the moments before this, when I was talking with our guest and we were preparing for this, what I usually do is I make sure I know how to pronounce the guest name correctly because names are so important. And I had this happen on the episode when Sandra Rosarola and I talked about making friends with monsters. And it was kind of funny because I couldn't do the role for her name in Italian. So I didn't ask you how to pronounce your name, and I don't want to screw it up. So I'm just going to let it be a mystery and let you introduce yourself to the listeners. And then I will have it nailed by the time I need to introduce you next. So why don't you introduce yourself in mystery fashion and let us know why you're here today.
This is so fun being a mystery guest. I've always wanted to be a guest on that singing show where you get to dress up as a like a mascot or some character, and they have to guess
Yes.
who's singing. So this could actually be that particular episode for you. I don't know if
Love
it's
it.
copyrighted already, but that could happen. My name is Chevalier Lovett. However, friends, a part of my network, call me Chev, and Ange, I would love for you to please call me Chev, just the first four letters of my name. My pronouns are he, him, or they, them. In my day job, I proudly serve as the chief operating officer for Florida Rising. And Florida Rising is the largest independent expenditure political organization in the state of Florida. We're spread across the entirety of the state, where we have thousands of members, but we represent millions of Americans and Floridians. Our mission in that organization is to ensure that there is an equitable path to political leadership for communities all across Florida, particularly those that come from marginalized communities like Black and Brown communities, AAPI, Indigenous, LGBTQIA plus, women and femme communities, and for young folk as well. I was born and raised here in the Central Florida area. I am a proud Winter Park Wildcat. For those very, very few five people that know what that means, it just means that I have been a lifelong Winter Park resident. And Florida has really been a place where my heart has been, but I have dedicated most of my career, my journey, my life in community development, community advocacy, and trying to put together and bridge the gaps to do this thing in a movement that I'm calling the peace movement, where we all can just live beautifully, happily, and equitably together.
Oh my gosh, that was absolutely beautiful. And so, in your introduction, you used several acronyms that I think listeners, and since we have a diverse audience, may not know
Sure.
what some of those acronyms are. So, can you perhaps, in the communities, when you were describing the diverse communities, can you describe in a little bit more detail what some of those acronyms and what those communities entail?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate anyone who's asking for clarity. And I wish more hosts were like you. So thank you in that fashion. So clearly, the Black and Brown represents Black African American particular communities, and the Brown represents the Latinx communities, which we know that both of those are not a monolith. There are a ton of different cultures that make up those two particular communities. The AAPI community is the Asian American Pacific Islander community. So those are a lot of our brothers and sisters that come from Asia as a continent, but also have Asian roots and backgrounds and are American citizens or are striving to make the US a better place by being residents of our country. And then the last that I mentioned, actually, there were two more that I mentioned. The other one that I mentioned was indigenous. So those are the folks that are native to the lands of the Americas. Those are the Seminole tribes, the Iroquois, the Choctaw, again, indigenous native folks that had the land before it was turned into what we know today. And then the LGBTQIA community is encompassed, could be encompassed in one word, which is known as the queer community, but it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, indigenous, and allyship, which is that A. And the allyship, I think, is really, really crucial that I'm sure I'll talk about a little bit more in this conversation, which the A is now turning from allyship to accomplishship or accomplices, meaning allies sit and kind of tolerate, where accomplices are those that get into the uncomfortable work and the community with other folks. So now the LGBTQIA plus communities are looking more so for accomplices rather than allies. But I think in this conversation today, when we're talking about mental health and mental awareness, I think we're all looking for accomplices in some form or fashion.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so then the intersect group, would they fall also into that I category?
The
Intersex
intersection
group?
group, yeah,
Yes.
the intersectionality groups, of course. That's also why that plus is there. So
Okay.
the queer community is probably the least of the monolithic of all the communities that I just named, because it encompasses so much. Like being Black is being culturally of a race, right? The same things for being Latinx, but being a part of the LGBTQIA plus community encompasses literally every single community that you can think of.
I was just in Atlanta. I'm actually from Atlanta. I do know where Winter Park is. I lived in Castleberry for a number of years back in circa 1993, 1995. So I know where that area is. But I was just back in Atlanta this past weekend for a board meeting at Georgia Tech, staying with a friend. And we watched the movie Everybody.
Mm.
Yes. And that was very impactful and moving. And I'm a biomedical engineer by education. And so to see the science and the mental impact of situations, and I will put listeners, I will put these acronyms. I will also put links to any of the maybe movies, shows, items that Chev and I talk about today in the show notes so that you can research them. I also, listeners, as you're listening to this episode, I will encourage you to go back and listen to episode number 17. It was our first Between the Lines episode where one of our listeners, Shane, wrote a blog post called Trapped, and it's about gender identity challenges. And our Between the Lines series is where an individual writes a blog post, and then either myself or we have some actors and actresses who are going to begin reading those as well, read that. And it really talks about the gender identity challenges in a certain community. So it's really moving. I felt so honored to be able to read it and advocate for that. So I think that ties into those individuals who want to kind of get in there and not just be allies and tolerate, but actually be advocates for it. So that's really exciting. Okay, so how did you get into where you're at today? What was your progression in life that led you to become so passionate about this?
Wow, that's such a intense question. And I know you and I were talking about earlier around like kind of trigger warnings, and this could be one of those. And I do want to say that to our audience out loud, because I'm going to talk about gun violence and murder. I dedicated my career and my life into community development. So I've worked in nonprofit my entire career, where I first started at the YMCA, which everyone knows around the world. It's a global name. It's a dance that everyone also knows. And yes, anytime I tell someone I worked for the YMCA, I break out into my YMCA dance. Maybe we'll have to put a link in
Yes.
the notes for that. That's really fun. But worked in that aspect because of youth and education, as well as equitable health practices, where the YMCA's mission was that every household deserved health equity. And what I loved about that, it wasn't health equity, just wasn't about fitness. It was at times about families having a volleyball practice together, which was family time. Sometimes it was about parents who are new to say, I just need 2 hours today to go work out. So I'm going to go drop my kids in the child development center and not feel judged about it. So I can go on the treadmill, or so I can just read, which is okay. And so I built a career in that time in the YMCA movement, where I ended up becoming an executive over a few different family centers, and just really got in touch with how different family units were made. And it was super beautiful. And then as I said, I got into it originally for education and youth. And so I wanted to go back a bit into my roots, into the education part. So then I went to an organization called City Year. And City Year is a part of an AmeriCorps system where 18 to 24-year-olds dedicate a year plus of their lives before college, sometimes during college, and many times after college, to help close the achievement gap that's happening in urban communities around public education. And so we know that a lot of those communities, particularly are poor and low income communities, and also communities of color. And those were really important to me as I grew up in a pretty poor household. And in fact, we were blessed to be able to be Habitat for Humanity recipients when I was about, I'd say 10 or 11 years old. So not too many people can say they actually built their own home, but I get to say I literally put the nails into my own house and into my room, which built a.
I love that. I'm
Thank
jumping
you.
in. Like I told
It's
you,
okay.
I volunteered for years and years and years with Habitat for Humanity. So, and when I lived in Tequila, so much so that it almost became a joke because I'm a really good painter and yet I hate painting. And so I used to try and sign up on days that were not painting. And then I would show up and the person who was running that project manager would see me and he'd laugh. He was just like, oh, we're either behind or we're ahead of schedule and guess what we're doing today. And I was like, are you seriously kidding me? Are we really painting? But it was amazing, like the number of families, so individuals, listeners, Habitat for Humanity. One of the things that's so amazing, as Chev is saying, is that I got to know the individuals whose homes these were. And next to them, they're holding up the shower bar while I'm screwing it in, and they're holding the level, and we're talking about each other as human beings and working side by side and painting ceilings. And it's such a beautiful thing to work alongside individuals who are passionate about improving their quality of life, improving things for their family, and working hard to achieve it. So that is so amazing, Chev.
And I appreciate you jumping in and actually sharing that experience. And I swear I'll get back on before I go off on a super tangent. But what that experience did was, folks think that Habitat homes are a handout, and it's actually a hand up. And it's really helpful for my family. I came from a single mother household. There were two of us, my sister and myself and my mom. So we called ourselves the Three Musketeers. We're the three strong. And we put 500 plus hours into building our home. And before those 500 plus hours, we collectively had to put another 500 hours into community service, building other people's homes. And what that experience did was it introduced communities, socioeconomic backgrounds to one another who may not have been introduced to one another before. And it helped to break down preconceptions and things and stereotypes that were learned. There were stereotypes about my mom being a single Black woman, that she was lazy. We got to break that down. And, Winter Park is a very affluent community, and a lot of the volunteers that came out to our homes were Winter Park residents and very wealthy Winter Park residents. So they got to see that my mom was always the first person there, and she was always the last person to leave. And that at the time she was doing that, she's also worked 2 jobs. So lazy had nothing to do with it. It was just a different socioeconomic background. And on the flip side, growing up in a poor household, we have these preconceived notions about folks who are wealthy, that everything's handed to them. And that experience building that home allowed me to learn, no, it's actually wealthy communities don't necessarily have things handed to them. I met a lot of families where some of my friends still today, their parents make them work twice as hard as I do or as I had to, because they want them to learn a behavior of, we got this wealth because we built it and we worked for it, and they want them to do that as well. So it was just beautiful. And it was a majority white neighborhood. And so having a Black family move in, we again got to break down a lot of barriers and jump over hurdles with one another. The full circle moment is now I'm an executive board member for one of the largest Habitat for Humanities in the country, which is the Habitat Humanity for Greater Orlando and Osceola County. And I get to represent families who were raised in those homes. I get to meet, and I'm at the table advocating why a mission like Habitat is so important to our communities. So after my time in city year, so I did work a little bit in the education forum, and I went into classrooms, and I helped principals, and I helped senior administrators, and I helped teachers, and I helped these young folk who wanted to be teachers or who wanted to see the education achievement gap kind of shorten. I got to counsel them and be in consultation of, being from a poor community myself, but also being someone that loves school, this is how you speak to a student who comes from this type of background. And if we know if we can identify these things by the third grade and even upwards to ninth grade, that the greater chance for someone in a poor community or in an urban community to graduate from high school is significantly high, which is better for our economy, which is all the things that come to it. So I did that. Then in 2016, something really traumatic happened in my life where the Pulse tragedy happened. So I am a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, and it was no secret. Actually, I take that back. For those that were very, very close to me, because I still wasn't extremely out. I wasn't, my story at that time wasn't an out story. But for those that were very close to me, Pulse was a place that I went twice a year. One was to celebrate my birthday, which is near the summer, and
And
the
what is
other.
Pulse?
Thank you. So Pulse is a nightclub, is a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida, that was opened in the early 2000s. And in 2016, there was the largest massacre of queer lives at the Pulse nightclub on June 12th, 2016. That actually also happened to be the night we were going to celebrate my birthday. And so I had that night a lot of friends going to the Pulse nightclub. And I distinctly remember I was in this really intense conversation with my significant other at the time, who is now my husband, where we actually met at Pulse 9 years previous to that. It was our first date. I did not show up to that party. I did not show up to that gathering. And I texted my group of friends that were going and said, hey, I'm in this conversation with my significant other, and I don't think I'm coming out because this is a really important conversation for us, but you all still go ahead and go out. And they asked me, like, where, some of us don't want to go to Pulse, where should we go? So I sent half of them to City Walk and the other half went to Pulse. Well, when I woke up the next day, 5 of my friends were murdered. 5 of the folks that I knew, lost their lives in this senseless tragedy that took a total of 49 lives for us. And that changed the trajectory of my path of my work, and my mission in life is to be a voice for the voiceless and to always stand against the constant bullying that happens to particular marginalized communities. And that same week was my last day at City Year. And I went into being a political activist as well as a community organizer, and some would say a leader in the political sphere of Florida, which is also a part of a national movement. I became a known movement leader after that time.
That is such an impactful story. I am so incredibly sorry for your loss. It is senseless, and it is completely senseless. I am grateful for the individuals who survived and grateful for all the work that you've done as a consequence of it and for your voice. One thing listening to your story, Chev, that I just love and I can see is your grit and passion throughout everything in your life, right? You looking at, okay, I've had this experience, so I want to allow others. So when you talk about being an executive on the board at Habitat for Humanity in the greater Orlando area, and being someone who's like, I was that individual who received one of those homes and worked 1,000 hours to be able to have this. That is amazing. And to have this huge moment, I will say that when I had this moment in my life, my daughter's 23 years ago, I lost my first child after lots of infertility treatment, lost my first child, was stillborn. And right after that, I created a whole bunch of scrapbook albums to give to hospitals, to give to mothers who had children who were stillborn, so they could put photos in them. Because when I left the hospital, no one realized I actually had lost a child. It was just this great need. And I said after that, I see individuals can handle situations in a couple of different ways. And there are some individuals who take tragedy and take a step back and say, I am going to take this and I am going to make a change in the world because of this. And that is what you have done repeatedly in your life. And that
Oh,
is
well,
so admirable. That is so amazing.
thank you for that. That was you didn't say tier warning or like go get your handkerchief. You didn't warn me about that. And that's another talking point you're gonna have to add.
Okay. Okay, listeners, grab your tissues and your coffee before you listen to this episode. So you're in now the political sphere advocating. Listeners, rewind and listen to what Chev said, giving a voice for the voiceless. That is, I can't wait, Chev, for you to listen to a lot of the other episodes of the podcast because our missions align so well. Repeatedly, that is what this podcast is about, is giving a voice to every single individual from all walks of life. I am so passionate about that and so grateful that you are as well. So now you're working in this space. What are some of your biggest maybe projects and some of your biggest challenges?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. One of the things that I think folks think about when they hear political activism is that they hear a particular party. So they think, oh, this is a party structure. You have your Republicans, you have your Democrat. And I just put on my mocking party voice, by the way. We are a progressive organization that believes in the values of folks' lives. And so although there's a particular sphere of partisanship that we tend to lean into at times, it's just because the candidates speak to that. We actually are a nonpartisan organization and we hold to the fire of accountability every person across the aisle. And that's the beauty of what I think our organization does. But some of the projects that we're working on is we believe in the ability for families to make the best decisions for their families when they are particularly having to go through something traumatic and to do it with professional help, right? We are also in a professional consultation that happens to be, at the moment, a woman's choice of their body with their families, right? Women's body autonomy is really important to us as an organization, something that we're highly working on and trying to get the abortion ballot initiative passed. We're working with a ton of organizations around that as well, but helping to lead the cause here in Florida. The other thing that we're working on is political education. How can someone run for office? It's really important for folks to understand their path to power to be a political leader. And a lot of folks want to do something, they just don't know how to do it. They always talk about, well, I might want to run for office, or how can I change this? Well, we run a political education school where we can help you figure out how to run for office, what might be the best office for you to run for, and how can you be the real change and voice in the community that you come from. The other things that we are really, really highly in is, as Florida is a really complex state. I think people think of us, as you know, you lived in Castleberry. People know us when they come in as the Sunshine State, as the House of the Mouse, which is Disney, or for our amazing college football teams. I just have to shout those college football teams out. However, we're known for so much more than that. We have the largest, and we rival California and New York in this way, but one of the largest diverse populations when it comes to ethnicity, to race, to gender, and the generational spectrum and ages. And so there's so much that we bring, and that's just more than Disney or Universal. The other thing that we do is Florida helps lead the cause in our nation for essentially everything. That is not a general fact. One of the things I like to throw in is, before gay marriage was the law of the land of the US in 2014, Florida passed it first. Because of Florida's influence as a state, the nation had no choice but to follow suit, right? The other thing is that in 2018, 1.4 million folks regained their right to vote through Amendment 4, which these were former convicted felons who served their time, who paid their restitutions, right? And who also, because of that, deserved their civic right to choose who would represent them in leadership. But for so long in this state, that wasn't a thing. Well, Florida decided no, overwhelmingly by more than 65% of the vote. No, returning folks who did pay their time, who did serve their time behind bars, and who were released and reformed, yeah, they are able to come back into the fold and vote. And that was overwhelming majority. So we're helping to ensure that, again, these equitable standards are upheld in our organization. And we're also really tackling mental health in policy and in the legislature as well, and how we're lobbying and having intense and crucial conversations with elected officials and community leaders, because it's the two that really have to tackle this issue in our state together, because there is, as I said before, there is this thing around guns and gun violence that really affect the community, particularly those who struggle with mental health in the state of Florida. And guns are just too easy to get. And so we're trying to educate folks on what's real mental health, what are the issues behind it, how do you tackle it, how do you heal from it, and then what can we do as a community and as a society to support that.
I want to tie to a couple of things that you said, and I will put this in the outro. I'll go ahead and say it now, listeners. As a reminder, the opinions expressed right now are mine and Chev's opinions. So I will throw that. It's always in our outro. But I absolutely I had no idea about that change in law for prisoners who have served their time to be able to vote. And I got chills when I heard that. My heart exploded. That makes me so very happy. The episode that is actually coming out, so we're recording this on October 6th. It's not going to go live on October 6th, but we're recording on October 6th. That's coming live on October 7th is where I interviewed the author, Dan Joseph, he's the author of Backpack to Rucksack. And in part of that, we talk about individuals, so vets coming back and integrating back into the community, and prisoners coming back and integrating back into the community. And one of the things I think is I would love for there to be some sort of maybe a 6-week boot camp where these individuals come back and it's like, okay, let's get you up to speed and set you up for success to integrate into your community so that you're not going immediately back to prison, or you're not, you don't have a lot of violence because you're not dealing with your combat issues and things like that. And so I would love for something like that. And I would love for that to set them up for success and be able to allow the community to see these individuals as individuals who, for whatever reason, made a mistake, served their time, and now they should be allowed to continue to live their best life as the rest of us do. So I wanted to say that. I wanted to say two other things. And one of those is tying to every voice and every life mattering. And I know you're thinking in the back of your head because you're trying to decide what is my favorite quote I'm going to list at the end of this podcast, but I will highlight a couple of quotes that previous guests have done that I think really tie to what you've said. And the episode for our first book club was where I interviewed the author of Brave, 52 Weeks of Mindfulness. And in that book, he says, every life matters, including yours. Start acting like it. And so when you think about the individuals who you're teaching them how to get involved in politics and take a step forward, that is something. Your life matters. Your community's lives matter. So start acting like it. And then the other quote, which I think you will appreciate because it is Sandra Rostarola in the episode on Making Friends with Monsters. Her favorite quote is a Walt Disney quote. And it is, the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. And I always think about that when people say, oh, this should change or this should change. And it's like, okay, well, if it matters and your life matters and your community matters and this should change, then quit talking about it and do it. And that's what you're advocating for and helping people do, which is so powerful.
Thank you. Yeah. And I am trying to figure out my favorite quote. And I actually think I do have it. So I think I will be ready once that time happens. But yeah, that is absolutely what it is. It's like, I think about this and being a nonprofit, I also have to raise money. And so as a person who raises money, I also, I think about there are so many resources. There's enough for all of us, right? There's enough for all of us. There's enough to go around for all of us to be happy, to be healthy, and to be whole. And there's this constant narrative, I believe, that is out there in the universe that is not the norm narrative. I don't think in our households, and let's talk about this. In our households, we don't have this. In most households, I will say that in most households, there is not this consistent negative narrative that us adults, when we leave our house to go to work, we hear it every day. When we turn on the news, we hear it all the time. When we're having conversations with strangers, at times we hear this negative thing, but that's not the norm. I think that's 2% of our time. The other 98% of our time is healthy, happy, beautiful, whole moment. And so we all can live in this type of society, and we all can represent those who may not have what we have, but we can get them there, right? Again, the thing I said around the habitat is it's not a hand out, it's a hand up. But the narrative after that, after it's a hand up, it's a full circle, because we all learn and we all thrive and we all grow together. And so the full circle moment of me being raised in a habitat home is now that I get to help build other habitat homes and put my money where my mouth is, my time, treasure, and talent in helping to build those things. So I love both those quotes that you named. Those very much resonate with me.
And so, listeners, one of the things when you're thinking about the impact of giving back to society, so I'll just pull up some of the things that you don't realize that when you give. So if you give to a nonprofit, and you can give in so many different ways. In your money, you can donate services, you can advocate, you can be a voice, you can share the message. There are so many different ways. However, science, I'm a biomedical engineer, so let's go back to science. Science says that when you actively, instead of focusing on yourself, when you actively give, then science shows that it lowers your blood pressure, it lowers your stress levels. Individuals have less anxiety and depression. It increases your own self-esteem. It improves your mood. You have better physical health and longevity and personal joy, overall health. It releases endorphins. It's the best dopamine fix that you can have in a healthy way. And so if you're sitting here thinking, okay, do I want to go and buy a new pair of shoes? Or do I want to go and collaborate with a community and help a community grow? Those new pair of shoes are really probably not going to lower your blood pressure, but working in that community, you might look sexy in those shoes for a little period of time. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with looking sexy in your new shoes. I'm just saying the gift of giving is so much. My personal experience is when I had the ability to collaborate with someone and give of something for myself, I just my heart explodes. I just am a happier human being. And I think so many people miss out on that joy in life because they don't take that step and realize that they're going to get so much more out of it than they give.
I totally agree with you on that. And I love you brought the science behind it. You can't argue with science when you have data that says something to what we're supposed to do as humans. We're supposed to uplift and love one another. We're supposed to support one another. So it makes so much sense to me why our blood pressure would be lowered when we give to others. Now, my blood pressure does go higher when I buy a new pair of shoes. My family knows this really a lot about me. There are things that I totally will always buy are shoes and glasses. And so thank you for checking me and calling me into this space to say, you know what, Chev, you have 100 plus shoes and you also have 100 plus pair of glasses. You can just kind of wait and not buy those this cycle. Wait till next quarter.
Oh my gosh, that is priceless. I absolutely love that. Well, and your photo is actually amazing, and I love your glasses. So I'll give you kudos on that.
And that tells me right there, I don't need new glasses. You just validated the reason. So Ange just gave a donation to some organization just now that I didn't know yet, but I'm going to do that instead of buying new glasses.
Yes, win-win. I love it. Okay, so. And remind me, because I know you have a hard stop, so I want to be respectful of your hard stop. So because have a very busy schedule doing very important work. But I do want to hear, okay, what's next in your journey? So what big highlight or super secret project that, of course, you can't share super secret projects, but what do you want to make sure the listeners hear about what you have coming up next so that you want to share?
I love this question. I'll lean into it. Let's just say y'all heard it first here, so we can share some secrets. So there's a couple things, and I'll talk about the personal, and I'll also talk about the professional. For the professional, let me start with there. We're revving up for an electoral cycle that's really important. As a professional, I don't care how people vote. I don't care what issues are important to you. What I care about is that you practice a privilege of going out there to decide the folks that will run your community and essentially this country, that you practice the engagement of voting. Because as I said before, there are millions of people out there who wish they could be in our shoes, who wish that they could vote, who wish that they had their right returned back to them to vote. Florida is just one of not many at all who returned the right to vote to returning citizens. And that was a hefty number. That's almost 2 million people. There are people who are coming to this country, who are immigrating into this country, who would love the chance to vote, to practice a civic engagement, because they fled from other countries that did not believe their voice mattered. And so from here, we are one of the biggest professional things I want folks to know is I have a personal goal of helping to enroll a record number of people to register to vote in the state of Florida, and to be an advocate for people to register to vote across the nation, and to push election cycles on folks. The other thing is to help folks understand what policies and issues will be affecting their particular communities at the local, the state, and the federal level. Florida Rising, as the largest independent political expenditure organization in the state of Florida, we are in community with a lot of elected officials, again, nonpartisan. And so we get to see how people get to go in those seats, and then how to get folks in front of their elected officials as well. The other thing that I'm really excited, being a queer person myself, is to help other queer folk in the communities have a particular representation. And so I understand that I stand on the shoulders of giants. And I also understand, and I'm starting to sit in this a little bit more. My therapist, I actually have a therapist and a life coach. Both are separate. And my therapist and both my life coach have told me to sit in a little bit more the influence that I may wield. And a part of that influence that I want to do in 2024 is to represent communities that I come from and that see me a part of their communities as well. So there's a lot if y'all stay tuned, there's going to be a lot that comes out in 2024 on how I plan to do this and where I'll be to do this. But the personal, I'm excited to announce, as of the date of the recording of this podcast, I will be taking a 3-month sabbatical in January of 2024. And I will be taking time to rest, time to reflect, time to spend with my family, time to study and to grow, but to just take a step back at the hustle and bustle of life and just reconnect with my mental and with my psyche so I can show up better for my family, for my community, for those I love, and for those I don't even know I love yet. So I'm really excited for that time.
I am excited for you to do that as well. I took a 6-week sabbatical. I built a software company before this with other co-founders. I was number 4. I was not a co-founder. I came in right after the co-founders, and we worked so hard and got burned out. And I think it was maybe 4 years in, the board allowed me to take a 6-week sabbatical. It was such a blessing. And I did so many of the things that you mentioned and came back so refreshed. And listeners, if you have the opportunity to do this, take advantage of it. It just allows you to be the absolute best you can be in all areas of your life. So congratulations on that. I know it's scary to make that decision, but congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you. And I know my boss will be listening to this podcast because she is a podcast queen, because she loves listening to them. So I want to appreciate her and my other colleagues on my executive team, because when I take time off, that means they have to step in and lean in. So it's a village. It takes an
Yes.
entire village. So thanks to my boss and to my other 3 executive colleagues who are stepping in so I can take time away.
That is a true team and a collaborative effort. And that's what culture and team and everything is about. I love it. Okay. Now, what is your favorite motivational quote that you want to make sure the listeners hear from you?
My favorite motivational quote is this. And it actually, Oprah said it. She went on a book tour with Michelle Obama. She did not start this quote in the book tour, but she brought it up several times, because when you talk about the Queen, Michelle Obama, you think about all the things that has happened in her life, from being a chief executive in a hospital, to being a lawyer, to being the first lady, to now helping millions and millions of people practice their civic engagement across the country and the world. And some folks call her lucky because she's able to do that. But Oprah says this. Oprah says, there is no such thing as luck. Luck is when the moment of preparation meets the moment of opportunity. And for me, I used to say I've been so lucky to be able to have my own home, Habitat for Humanity home. I used to be able to say, gosh, I'm lucky to be a parent of twins. But when I think about that quote in particular, is I prepared for this. I have prepared extremely hard for this. For my twins in particular, you talked about your journey of infertility. My husband and I had to do IVF and the surrogacy route. And so there's a lot of scary things that happen around that. And we prepared ourselves to be fathers now to twin boys. And so it is not luck. It just happens to be a lot of preparation mixed in with a whole hell lot of opportunities.
Amazing. I also love that quote and agree. And sometimes I will say, oh, I'm so lucky. And I pause now and say, I am so grateful for this because yes, I am so grateful that I've had this opportunity and this opportunity and this opportunity. And if, as you've mentioned, have worked hard to prepare for the next opportunity in it. And listeners, I encourage you to do the same. This has been amazing, Chev. Is there anything else you want to make sure the listeners hear from you?
I want to say you and I are now new best friends. I just have to say that out loud.
Yes.
And I want them to know how much I have intensely enjoyed my time with you. Thank you just for reaching out to want to listen to my story and to hear how we can better and change the world. And I want folks to know you can always lean into myself, to Florida Rising. Again, we are a holistic organization that's just trying to figure out opportunities for an equitable world for everyone. So thank you. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much. I know your time is super busy and this is amazing. I'm so grateful for your vulnerability and for your hard work of giving a voice to every single human being. I am grateful. Thank you so much.
And you're the best. Thank you.
Listened to episode number 19. What a fun interview to have with Chev. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. If you want more information about Chev and Florida Rising, please visit their website, www.floridarising.org. I will include that link as well as several links for articles about Chev in the show notes, so check them out. As a reminder, the experiences and advice expressed in this episode are the host's and guest's own personal stories and do not represent the opinions of any organization mentioned. RAN is passionate about opening the doors for all voices and experiences, not just those expressed in any particular podcast. That includes your voice. So if you want to share your voice, experiences, or expertise, we encourage you to be a featured guest by emailing us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org or submit a blog post by emailing blog@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. In case you've missed it, we have started a new blog series called Between the Lines, where either myself or better yet, we now have actors and actresses who will read the select blog post for you on the podcast. So submit your blog today. We also encourage you to comment on the episode so that we can continue to provide content that is most beneficial to the community. And if you do, we'll give you a shout out. So here are some of our recent shout outs. First off, Lynette Nichols, you are amazing and one of our most loyal followers. Thank you so much. Lynette said, "Every life matters, even yours. Gifting his book to myself. Another great episode in the books." After she listened to episode number 14, where I interviewed Dr. Constance on his book, A Brave Year, 52 Weeks Being Mindful. I received a text message from another guest who commented on episode number 18, Backpack to Rucksack with Dan Joseph, and said, "I listened to this podcast and it was very relatable to me, especially the part about suicidal ideations and how to talk to others who have suicidal ideations, even though I have no experience in the military." Thanks for giving us that feedback. We really appreciate it. Now, we are proud that every individual working with RAN does so on a 100% volunteer basis. You can support the mission by clicking the love, not like icon on our podcast and subscribing. The reception of this podcast blows us away. As of the recording of this outro, we now are up to 18 countries with listeners in it. And hence, we are seeking a volunteer podcast publishing assistant. If you're interested, email me at podcast@recoveryadvocate.network.org. I hope you will connect with us at www.recoveryadvocate.network.org, where you can donate to the mission, read those blog posts, and stay in the loop about upcoming events, including a fundraiser auction that's being held on October 26th through the 28th, which includes those book club books that we've read, signed footballs by some amazing players, and that personalized guitar donated by the band Bon Jovi. Make sure you follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Recovery Advocate Network and on Twitter at Ran to Wellness so that you do not miss out on any events. So, listeners, pause what you're doing right now, subscribe, follow us, give us a 5-star rating, and provide some feedback. And finally, share these episodes with your friends. You never know whose hearts you will touch. As I mentioned, we already have listeners in reaching close to 20 countries around the world, so please be a part of the reason someone has new hope today. If this episode was triggering to you, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741, and/or if in the United States, dialing 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you live in one of those countries that are outside of the U.S. and you have information for helpful resources, please email us so that we can provide that information to listeners in need. Thank you for joining us today. We know you're super busy, and we really hope you enjoyed this session. We hope you'll take a moment to check out some other episodes that you've missed, and don't miss us next Saturday when we release our newest episode. Now, back to your coffee.